Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Union Pacific Railroad Evanston Subdivision in HO Scale. My name is Darrell Cruz, owner, builder, and operator of the layout, and your host for a special episode on modernizing ScaleTrains AC4400 locomotives. I picked up 6 of these from Lombard Hobbies, and I've been very impressed with these models. AC4400s are definitely one of my favorite locomotives. And as I said, I picked up 6 of them from Lombard Hobbies. I think they still have a few left over if you're interested. My goal here is to modernize these from red sill and dome antennas to yellow sill and PTC antennas. So the first step in this modernization of these locomotives, and again I did this 6 times for 6 locomotives. First step is to remove the handrails very carefully. I use an X-Acto knife. Have to be real careful if you use an X-Acto knife. Make sure you use the back of the knife so you don't accidentally cut the handrails. They are very, very fragile, but they just basically lift out of their holes that they go into. You just have to make sure that you lift in the correct direction. Obviously, the 3 at the top on the upper level walkway are inserted into the walkway, and the rest of them are placed into the sides. So it's, once you get the hang of it, it's not too bad. HO scale is much easier to deal with than N scale. With N scale, you would need to, in fact I did this a couple times, you need to take the whole body off and remove the shell from the molding that contains all of the handrails and then kind of a frame type of thing. So definitely a little bit more of an issue at N scale compared to HO scale, plus the fact that everything's about half the size. But it didn't take very long, and was able to get the handrails off without any breakage, which is always a plus. Once I had the handrails off, and I was using some micro scale decals. Now this is a $10 sheet, and the only thing I'm really using is the yellow stripes, and there's 4 of them per sheet. I'm able to do 3 locomotives with 2 sheets, and so it comes out to about $6 to $7 per locomotive, so it's not too expensive to put these on. And like I said, I'm only using the yellow stripes for the sills, but I do use some of the numbers and so forth for renumbering projects and so on. And they have a lot of small decals on there also. So anyway, I had to do a little bit of planning exactly what kind of pieces I'm going to be putting on here. It's not just putting one long piece on there. Basically need to cut it a little bit. This side has kind of this object kind of in the middle there that I don't want the decal to go over, so I'm going to cut it right before that little object there. And I'm not really cutting it here. I'm only putting a little bit of a notch in the paper with the X-Acto knife, so that I have a guide on where to cut. When we lived in Rochelle, Illinois for 17 years, 1997 to 2014, I used to go down to the railroad park and watch trains. A lot of trains go through Rochelle. And I think during that time period, these probably saw more of these locomotives than any. And so they kind of became my favorite while I lived there. And I modeled the Geneva sub, which goes through Rochelle, for many years, and have switched now on this layout to the Evanston sub, which is way out in Wyoming and Utah. Alright, so I cut a couple of pieces here and I'm putting it in water. Now I usually let it set in the water for about 10 seconds and then I just let it set for a little bit longer period of time as we let it set and get ready. Alright, so they're loosened up enough. I usually slide them off of the sheet just a little bit. If you notice I have a little bit sticking off the end, I hold that down to the sill with my finger and then I'll pull the paper out from underneath it, and then the decal lies pretty nicely on the sill. Now sometimes it just like goes into the right spot and other times it will refuse to go where you want it. One of the biggest issues is the water surface tension of the water. Well, sometimes if there's too much water underneath the decal, between the decal and the shell, or the sill in this case, if there's too much water, then the surface tension will not allow it to go where you want it to go. But it looks like we have everything down pretty much the way it needs to be for that particular piece. Here we have our second piece cut and saturated with water. So we're going to go ahead and lay it on also, using pretty much the same method, sliding the paper out from underneath. And again, trying to make sure everything settles down the way it's supposed to. And now we have another piece here. I'll slide it here on the end, and then we have a couple of small pieces that we're going to put on the very end because it's going to go in between the little placards there, or stenciling that the manufacturer or railroad put on the sill. Now eventually the railroads, when they were putting on the yellow sills, eventually they would paint the entire sill and then put the documentation back on top of the yellow sill. That first they would just put the yellow sill down with tape or whatever and left the red underneath it in spots, and that's kind of what I'm doing here, where the stenciling is left. It's still red, and then later they would go ahead and paint it whenever they got it into the shop, I assume. Now, if a piece has too much water underneath it, as I said before, it won't move where it needs to go. So I'll take if there's too much water, I'll take a Q-tip and just kind of absorb some of the water out of there. And then that allows it to be able to be moved a little bit better. Now, you don't want to get too much water out of there, otherwise it won't move at all. It'll just kind of stay in place, or just not want to go where it needs to go. But anyway, I have been using this method where the red shows through where the documentation is. Now I could put the yellow sill down all the way across and then put a decal on top of it, but I really hate to do that. It doesn't always work very well that I've seen. To put a decal on top of a decal, I'm sure it would probably work, but I decided to go ahead and do it this way. I just think it works out better and still looks good. Looks like a modern locomotive with the yellow sill. So it looks like we have almost everything on the sill. We still have, as you can see, some yellow stripes to put at the front of the sill, and that piece actually wraps around onto the front of the locomotive. Here you can see I'm using my Q-tip again to remove some of the water so that I can move it into the correct spot. These yellow decals are almost exactly the same width as the yellow, excuse me, as the red stripe. So if you get it exactly on top of the red sill, it will cover it up completely. At least enough so that you can't see it, unless you have a magnifying glass. Alright, once I get it all on, I use a solve set, and I let it dry. If you notice, I did put the sill on the front there, the yellow stripe. You definitely need to let it dry completely. I'm talking about a couple of hours, because once you put the solve set down, it basically helps the decal settle down and adhere to the plastic. But once you put it on, you will not be able to move it again without it tearing up. One thing I do also is put some clear coat on, either a flat or just simple clear coat over the top. And again, I wait till the solve set is completely dry, absolutely completely dry, and then usually the next day even, and then I'll put the clear coat on. Here you can see I removed the dome antennas, and I was kind of disappointed that there's a sill there. I thought it might just be, on top of the roof, and I would be able to just take the dome off and then easily put the PTC antenna on. Did not work out that way, I'm afraid. There was a ridge all the way around it. Now the small dome antenna was fine. It just simply was set on there. But the larger one did have some ridges that I used a chisel X-Acto blade to remove the plastic and make it into a nice flat smooth surface. Now in order to do that, I had to do a little bit more than just remove the ridges, because when the ridges were off, you still had the area a little bit higher than the rest of the roof. So I had to not only take the ridges off, but then scrape everything down to the plastic. So we take all the paint off. There was some black paint and then some yellow paint. And then I also needed to remove just some of the plastic too, because it was a little bit higher than the rest of the roof. So definitely it took a little bit of time and patience to continue to work the chisel. The way this chisel works, depending on how you have the angle and which side you're using. On one side it digs in more, so you have to make sure you have the right angle, otherwise it'll dig in too much. And then on the other side it just kind of doesn't dig in at all, it just scrapes. So trying to use one side that will dig in, and then use the correct angle so that it doesn't dig in too much, and then flip it over and use the other side, and then kind of scrape off any excess that still remains. So it kind of took some time. I tried to make sure, if you notice my left hand, I'm only holding the top of the model. Made sure not to try to grab the sides or anything, because I really, definitely did not want to damage any part of it. There's a lot of really nice details on these locomotives. So if you notice, my left hand is just on the top. My thumb's not touching anything, although I will kind of use it to kind of guide the blade, and then my right hand is holding the blade. Now here you can see I'm scraping. Again, the whole idea is to not touch anything that might break as far as detail goes. There's some beautiful details on these locomotives, and I want to make sure that none of it is damaged. So here you see I'm just not only taking the paint off, but I'm taking some of the plastic off as well too. So I used the PTC antennas from Macrail, and they were $7 and something for 2 sets. So basically $3.50, $4 per locomotive. So not very expensive, and they're pretty good detail. In fact, they're very good. Comparing them to the PTC antennas that come with other models, including ScaleTrains and Athearns, they're exactly the same as far as the level of detail and the fidelity to detail. So my goal is that you wouldn't really be able to tell which of the locomotives came with factory PTC antennas and which came with the modified PTC antennas. I had tried to use some plastic cement for these, but I didn't have the right kind of plastic cement, so it wasn't working. So I went ahead and used some super glue, and worked out really well. Holds it real nice. And the only thing is you only have about 10 seconds or so to move it around and get it to where you want it. Otherwise, it will stop and stay exactly where it's supposed to be. And so I was very careful, make sure, and it fit perfectly on the little flat area of the roof. And once it was where it needed to be, I kind of pushed down a little bit, and things were fine. Once I had them all glued on, all 6 locomotives, and I used some blue masking tape and masked around each of them, and then used my airbrush to spray paint some Badger Modoflex Harbor Mist Gray paint. And it came out just slightly darker than the factory paint gray, but it's real close. So you really cannot tell that much difference, if any at all. You can, and then when everything's weathered, it will be imperceptible. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but anyway, you won't be able to perceive the difference in the color gray. Gray is a pretty easy color to match, I found. And Harbor Mist Gray is pretty consistent in color, and the Badger Modoflex Harbor Mist Gray, as far as airbrushing went on very nicely. So here you see all 6 models complete with the yellow sills and PTC antennas. You notice I painted the actual antennas silver to match what I saw on the prototype photos, and then basically what most of the other PTC antennas on the stock units, the models were that's manufactured applied PTC units, kind of matches that. So let's watch these updated, modernized, modified AC4400 locomotives from ScaleTrains. Great locomotives. Recommend them highly. As I said, I think Lombard Hobbies has a few left. I think ScaleTrains probably does also. But I got mine from Lombard Hobbies. Would definitely recommend them. And definitely looks great. I'm really happy with the way these turned out. Glad to see that they have all the locomotives on the layout in the proper era. That's one thing I did not have on my layout on the Geneva sub, the N-scale layout. I was collecting locomotives for many years from the 90s, and actually from I was in it for 50 years. But the locomotives that I had on the final layout, most of them were purchased in the previous 20 years, but still a lot of them had red sills. And so I had a mixture of red sills and yellow sills, and so it really was not very consistent in the rolling stock that I had on the Geneva sub. So it's been kind of fun with the HO scale layout here. I've only been working on it for 2 years. I used all the money that I took in selling the N-scale equipment and purchase HO scale equipment. And since I just purchased it over the last 2 years, I made sure that all the equipment that I'm getting, especially locomotives, fits the 2016 era. So was really focusing on the yellow sills and the correct antennas, and then as far as the rolling stock goes, try to make sure that they all have the safety striping and are rolling stock that is still rolling on the prototype today. One thing I still have to do on all the rolling stock is weathering. So I'm still working on a lot of the scenery on the layout, and I want to get the scenery kind of, at least the basic scenery and the basic ballast. I want to get that all done for the entire layout, and then I'll start working on weathering. And we'll try and take as much time as I can on the locomotives, but as far as the rolling stock go, I'll probably do those in pretty large batches, try and do like 20 at a time, and do a lot of just general weathering, take the plastic look off of them. And then as time goes on, I'll maybe do some more detailed weathering. Alright, so we're coming up to Evanston. This is the UTLX repair facility. Looks like I'm blowing the horn for the crossing here at the UTLX plant. We came from the Castle Rock area all the way up to Curvo and to the Wasatch Summit, and now we're heading into Evanston proper. This is the next area I'm going to be working on scenery. I'm already putting some backdrops up, which is kind of backwards. I probably should have done that last, but I did do a lot of the backdrops already. I'll just need to be really careful when I paint the scenery. Scenery on most of this, the upper level would be done first and then the lower level, but almost all of it here in the Evanston area is flat, basically just plywood. So it's just going to be a lot of painting, ground foam, static grass, ballast, and maybe some trees and shrubs. Probably actually a lot of trees in Evanston, especially as you get to towards the station and everything. And then out here in the country. So the first 3 locomotives, the first and third unit were AC4400s with the new antennas, and here you have a stack train headed up by an AC4400 with the new yellow sills and PTC antennas. So 7152 is the AC4400, and then the second unit is a -9, and then the third unit is another AC4400. I ended up getting all 6 Union Pacific road numbers from ScaleTrains. And somebody had asked me why I didn't buy the one. They had one unit that had yellow sills, but it had the dome antenna. That was number 7098. And then they had 5 with red sill. And someone asked why didn't I just buy 6 of the 7098 and then just renumber them all. And a couple of reasons why I didn't do that. One is that when I renumbered them, I'd have to renumber the number boards, and the number boards on all these units are nicely lit and look really nice, and so I was kind of hesitant to be renumbering the number boards, and I just really felt like it'd be more work to renumber and redo the number boards than it would be to do the sills. So that's one reason. The second reason is that ScaleTrains did a good job of doing a lot of different variations. So the red sills, some of them have high number boards, some of them have nose number boards, some of them have a window in the door, the cab door going into the cab at the front of the locomotive. Some of them did not have the window. Some of the sills were a little bit different, so a lot of different variations, so I definitely wanted to have that. So very happy with the way these turned out, and I'm very happy that you had a chance to watch this. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and have a great week. Take care, everybody.